Wonderful. I'm going to wait a few seconds for some people to connect. Great. I see people connecting. I see we have 20 something. Wonderful. All right. So I am going to kick us off today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I hope everyone's enjoying the spring weather. My name is Katie DeMalley, and I am a program director at the French American Foundation. I'm really looking forward to today's discussion with Séverine Autesserre from Barnard College to discuss her new book, The Frontlines of Peace, An Insider's Guide to Changing the World, which examines the peace industry. And I know several of you who are on the meeting or who were the first to sign up have already received a copy of the book. So that's great. Before we get started, if you are in a position where you can do so, I would encourage you to turn on your cameras so we can make this as interactive of a conversation as possible. And once Megan and Séverine open the floor to questions during the second half of the conversation, you're welcome to either raise your hand to speak or signal with one of the icons or write in a question in the Q&A or chat buttons below. I would like to introduce our moderator first, Megan Carroll. Hi, Megan, who is going to help us with the flow of conversation. Megan is currently at the United Nations, where she covers counterterrorism issues in Asia. She served across the UN in political affairs, peacekeeping, and development. And prior to her current role, she evaluated peacekeeping missions and served as the team leader partnerships for the UN's Departments of Peacekeeping Operations and Field Support. She focused on the UN's partnership with the World Bank and contributed to the joint UN World Bank report, Pathways for Peace. And previously, she was appointed by President Obama to serve as a White House fellow, where she was part of the US government's response to the Ebola epidemic. So Megan, thank you. And I will let you take it from here to introduce Séverine and to begin our conversation. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for all being here today and to the French America Foundation for bringing us together to discuss the new book, The Frontlines of Peace, An Insider's Guide to Changing the World by Séverine Autesserre. Over the next hour, following a brief introduction, we'll first hear from Séverine, followed by a few questions from me before opening up to the audience. Séverine Autesserre is an award-winning author, peace builder, and researcher, as well as a professor of political science at Barnard College, Columbia University. She's the author of The Trouble with the Congo, Peaceland, and The Frontlines of Peace, in addition to articles for publications such as Foreign Affairs, International Organization, and the New York Times. She has been involved in international aid for more than 2 decades and has conducted research in conflict zones ranging from Colombia, Somalia, to Israel and the Palestinian territories. Her research has helped shape the intervention strategies of several United Nations departments, foreign affairs ministries, and non-governmental organizations, as well as numerous philanthropists, and academics. She has also been a featured speaker at the World Summit of Nobel Peace Laureates and the US House of Representatives. Séverine, thank you for being here today to share your expertise and important insights with us. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Megan, for this very kind introduction. Thanks to Natalie, Katie, Elizabeth for organizing this event and inviting me. And thank you so much for being here. I've done a lot of events in the past couple of weeks since the book was published, but this one is particularly meaningful to me because I'm a French American citizen, so the French American Foundation means really something special. Also, I understand that we have people who are joining us from all over the world today, which is absolutely fantastic. As for me, I'm talking with you from my living room in New York because due to the COVID pandemic, I still cannot access my office on Columbia University campus. But it doesn't matter because I'm absolutely thrilled to talk with you a little bit about my new book, The Frontlines of Peace. And we just decided, so we were discussing a little bit among ourselves before you all came with us. And we just decided that I would show you a few photos and a few maps. Although usually the French American Foundation doesn't like it when we use PowerPoint presentations, they decided that it would be worth it so that you can visualize a little bit what I'm talking about. So I'm going to share my screen, and you should be able to see. You see a slide right now. Okay. So the Frontlines of Peace, the book I'm talking about, is a book about hope. It's a book about the ordinary and yet extraordinary individuals and communities that have found effective ways to confront violence. And so to get us started, today I want to tell you a story about these kinds of people. And it's a story that takes place in Congo, in the middle of one of the deadliest conflicts since World War II. In 2007, a little boy named Luca was kidnapped and forced to work for an armed group and for rebels, just like the ones you see in my photo. And Luca was so small at the time that he couldn't even hold a rifle. So his commanders would march him up front and they would use him as a human shield. Somehow, Luca survived, and after 3 years with the armed groups, the militia commanders released him and they sent him back home to his mother, Justine. But Luca had trouble assimilating. He hated school. He was often hungry because his mom didn't have much money. And he still believed what his commanders had drilled into him, that the only way to survive was to use violence. So Luca kept running away to join militias. The only time he felt safe was when he had a gun in his hands. He was 8, and it was the only life that he knew. Meanwhile, in DC, in the United States, a young Indian American woman named Vijaya Thakur was working for various aid organizations focused on Congo. And Vijaya was growing very uncomfortable with her colleagues' work because her colleagues used the traditional top-down approach to peace building. They relied on outsiders' skills and expertise. And as a result, they ended up harming the very people that they wanted to help. So, for instance, some of them believed that violence in Congo was due to the illegal exploitation of minerals like coltan, which the young men in my photo are mining. So, the Vijaya's colleagues focused their time and efforts on getting new laws on conflict minerals. But the new regulations cost many vulnerable people their jobs. And these people had to join armed groups in order to survive. So whenever Vijaya traveled to Congo, she started asking ordinary citizens what they believed would lead to peace. And that's a photo of her doing just that. And eventually she decided to try something in the village where Justin and Luca were living. In partnership with local activists, Vijaya organized lengthy meetings and workshops in which the residents would develop their own analysis of the conflicts they face and decide what the best responses would be. And the first part of that plan was for Vijaya and her fellow activists to give out $40 each to a few village women, including Justine, who used the money to start small businesses like tailoring or donut shop, the businesses of the kinds that you see in my photo. The businesses took off, and eventually the participants had enough money to implement the second parts of their plans. So they installed taps for clean drinking water, and they organized trainings for the teachers to learn how to curb ethnic violence instead of fueling it. And eventually, they lobbied local authorities for protection and better services. So Luca now had 3 meals a day, shoes without holes, and role models who didn't use violence to survive and gain power. And like Luca, all of the villagers were safer and they were healthier. And one day Vijaya was talking with Justine, and Justine kept using the word success to refer to the whole initiative. It was because Luca had turned 13, and for the first time in his life, he was speaking in the future tense. He had stopped running away all the time, and he was making plans, peaceful plans within his community. He now wanted to hold a pencil instead of a gun. And for those of you who received a copy of my book, now you see where the artist got her inspiration for the book cover. So Vijaya decided to create the Resolve Network that has used this approach to help more than 7,000 people over the past 10 years. All individuals at risk of being recruited by armed groups, and more than half of them former combatants like Luga. So militias have formed and reformed in Congo. The pressure to remobilize has been enormous, but not a single person participating in the Resolve programs has started or gone back to fighting. And to me, this story is inspiring. It's also very telling because there are big differences between the way most peace-building organizations work and what Vijaya did. So to start, Vijaya decided to build peace from the grassroots by relying on insiders, instead of always focusing on elite and leaders in capital cities and headquarters. And even more importantly, Vijaya didn't come and impose her beliefs, and that way, she avoided doing more harm than good. Unlike so many people before her, Vijaya was humble, she was respectful, and she put ordinary citizens in the driver's seat. Peace builders who work like Vijaya are a very small minority in the aid world, but they exist. I found them within many different organizations in many different countries. And the work that they do is incredibly important because unfortunately, there are many people who face the same kind of terrible circumstances that Justine and Luca were facing. More than 1.5 billion people live under the threat of violence in nearly 50 conflict zones around the world, in the ones you see on my slide. And so peace building is a crucial task for many states and international institutions. And when I say peace building, I really mean any and all actions that help promote peace before, during, and after a conflict. The thing is that our templates and techniques for approaching war and peace just don't work. So Afghanistan, Kosovo, Congo, Colombia, Ukraine, Myanmar, we've heard the same story many times before. There was violence, the United Nations got involved, donor countries pledged millions in assistance, warring parties called for ceasefires, they signed agreement, held elections, and the headlines praised peace. And then a week or two later, sometimes just days later, violence flared up again. Often, it had never actually ended, and in many cases, it lasted for years after. More than half of all ongoing wars have already lasted for more than 20 years. In just the past 5 years, wars have spawned the worst refugee crisis since World War II. And our newspapers keep running headlines like the ones you see in my slide. And there has been plenty of discussion about what has gone wrong when we've tried to stop wars in the past. But I think that now it's time to ask, what has gone right? And it turns out that elections don't build peace, and democracy itself might not be the golden ticket, at least not in the short term. Contrary to what most politicians preach, building peace doesn't require billions in aid or massive international interventions. Instead, it often involves giving the power to ordinary citizens. Ultimately, many successful examples of peace building in the past few years have involved innovative grassroots initiatives led by local people and at times supported by foreigners, often using methods shunned by the international elites. So rather than focusing on handshakes between presidents and abstract peace agreements and negotiations between governments and rebel leaders, the Frontlines of Peace details the concrete, everyday actions that actually make a difference on the ground. So some of these are bizarre, some are creative, some involve age-old traditions, and some are just common sense. My book explains how peace building can actually work so that we can finally improve the lives of billions of people. And I showed that to end violence from war, but also to address violent conflicts at home, whether home is Paris or New York or anywhere else in the world, we have to fundamentally change the way we view and build peace. And this argument builds on 20 years of work in 12 different conflict zones, the ones you see in red on my map, and more than 800 in-depth interviews with peace builders, warlords, survivors, peacekeepers, ordinary citizens, outside observers. So if you see the photos, on the right-hand side, you see me conducting interviews. And then on the left-hand side, I'm conducting what anthropologists and ethnographers call participant observations, meaning that I was patrolling with United Nations peacekeepers. And I was very happy that day. I thought, yay, I'm fitting in, I'm such a good ethnographer. But the thing is that I'm not a man, and there were only men on this military base. And also, I felt that there was something wrong with my bulletproof jacket. So, and if you're familiar, if you have any kind of military training, I'm sure that you can already spot what's wrong with it. I couldn't, so I went patrolling with the peacekeepers for several hours, and the bulletproof jacket was heavy. It wasn't comfortable. It didn't protect my heart or any of my vital organs. And it's only when we were back to the base that one of the Indian officers told me, you know, you've been wearing it backward. Anyway, I still got really, really good material that day. So I think that I'm more or less at the end of the time. We had said about 15, 20 minutes. So I assume that I should stop talking and then we should go on to the discussion, or do you want, I mean, I can talk for hours. I just wrote a whole book about that. But should I stop talking and should we move on to the discussion?
I think so, Séverine. That was a great introduction. And I think the photos are really telling of the depth and the breadth of your 20 years of experience and work in the field. So thank you for that. I mean, as you said, The Frontlines of Peace is a book about hope and the power of individuals to create change in their own communities and countries. There is so much truth and lived experience in your book. I loved it. An endorsement for the book. It's a fantastic book. And I want to thank you for that. I feel like it should be required reading for all UN and NGO staff, especially those working overseas. Having worked in international development for nearly my entire career, including 4 years on the ground in South Sudan, I greatly appreciate your emphasis on the need to put locals in the driver's seat, and that humility should be at the heart of our work. That is, for international staff to be flexible and have iterative approaches, be good listeners, and invest significant time in learning about the communities and political dynamics in the communities in which we are working, living, and trying to create change. As you convey in your book, one cannot meaningfully contribute when one does not understand the context and the culture. So again, thanks for that. I'll shift to my first question. In recent years, the international community has increasingly and encouragingly embraced the model of engaging locals and recognized the vital role of local organizations. However, as you point out in your book, the overarching model for peacemaking remains to keep it at the treetops level. I'm wondering what you would say to critics who say we're not designed to work at the local level.
Thank you so much, Megan, for this question. I would say, well, I would say so many things. The first thing that I would tell them is you may not be set up to work at the local level, but you can change. I mean, institutions have been created by humans, and humans can change them. And the institutions, for instance, you mentioned. So the host just muted me. Am I talking too much? Or you don't like my answer? Okay, institutions can change. And institutions have changed a lot. The United Nations is completely different today than what it was in 1948. The State Department, which was the quote that you're actually building on, I had a State Department official who came to me at the end of one of my presentation about the book, and he said, but Séverine, like, you know, we're not set up to work at the local level. We cannot do that. And I told him, well, maybe you cannot do that right now, but you can change. I mean, and he's a really, really high level person. So if anybody can change institution and can change the State Department, he could. So institutions can change. And the thing is that I don't even know if it's true that they're not set up to work at the local level, because a lot of organizations are managing, a lot of units within organizations are managing to do that. So for instance, I heard a lot of people, a lot of your colleagues, Megan, at the United Nations tell me, oh, we can do that. But at the same time, I know plenty of their colleagues who are doing exactly the kind of work that I think is really working, and you're nodding, so I'm sure that you have some of them in mind. So a lot of organizations are already doing that work. The only thing is that they are a minority, and they're often pushed aside, and they're often harassed, and they often have a lot of trouble with their hierarchy. And so what I'm trying to say is they're doing fantastic work, and instead of pushing them aside, we should emulate them, and we should take them as a model to reform the entire organization.
Thanks for that. I saw a question come in from Tom, and Tom, I'll get there in just a minute. I'm going to ask one more question. It's so as you rightly say, peace requires patience and long-term investment, both of money and relationships, you know, really time on the ground and trust building, which is directly counter to the way that the international aid is structured. That is short-term political cycles, budget cycles. Do you have any advice on how we can foster long-term solutions despite the reality of short-term budget cycles?
So it's something that, yes, I mean, my answer is yes, there are people who have been able to do that, and that I mentioned in the book. So for example, the Swedish government has managed to find a way to do long-term funding. The Belgian government, they did that, and then they went back when there was a new government, a new election. The Dutch government, and there are also multi-year multi-donors initiatives for Myanmar, for Northern Ireland, etc. So my own answer would be look at them, look at these models and see how they've managed, and talk with them, and see how they've managed to go over the constraints that other donors are facing. But there is also, I want to do a shout out for a new organization, it's completely brand new. I think it was created last week, or at least, you know, it was launched last week, and it's called Radical Flexibility Fund. You've heard of it by Riva Kantovic? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're actually thinking, like, I think the entire organization is devoted to thinking about this very topic, and finding very, very clear guidance. So that's an organization to look at as well, to see what they come up with in the coming month.
I think that's a great model. And in fact, it's the one I was thinking about when I was reading your book, that more and more foundations are really turning towards a participatory budgeting cycle, where they're not just giving money to grantees, but they're including grantees in the whole process of designing their programs, which seems, you know, basic, but that actually is kind of a novel idea, right? I mean, I know you and I are so much on the same page. Of course, you would consult the local population before doing an intervention, but historically that just has not been the way, right? You have people that kind of helicopter in, design a project, and they don't even consult or confer with the local populations. It's quite terrifying. And actually one reason why I have shifted my own career, which is a whole other Zoom conversation about international development, the way international development is structured is counter to long-term relationship building.
Yeah.
So we have some questions from Tom in the chat. So I'll turn to his question. The first is, how scalable is this model or method?
Okay, so it is highly scalable. So can I show you another map?
Of course, please.
Okay, great. Because so I was telling you the story started with the story of one little village, and then if I had several hours, I would have told you about an entire island, and I would have finished the presentation after talking a lot, telling you about Somaliland. And I don't know if any of you has heard about Somaliland. I'm looking at the screen to see if anybody's nodding apart from Megan. Okay, so that's why I want to show you my screen. So let me go back to, so that's where we were. And I want to, sorry, I'm flipping my slides. Okay, sorry, that's the one I wanted to show you. Somaliland. So Somaliland, if you see my slide now, it's the northern part of Somalia, and it's an autonomous region in the northern part of Somalia. And what's fascinating about Somaliland is that there is a really, really interesting contrast between, on the one hand, you have Somalia. So Somalia is extremely violent. It has some of the highest ranking in the world's least desirable category, so most corrupt country, second most failed state, etc. And on the other hand, you have this autonomous region in the north of Somalia that is called Somaliland, and that has I'm looking at the markings that Val is putting on my slides. Somaliland has experienced very little violence over the past 20 years. It has a well-functioning state, it has decent public services, it has even some kind of functioning democracy. And so you can see the scale here, but it's not very clear. So to give you a sense, I mean, you see the scale of Africa. To give you a sense, Somaliland is as large as countries like Syria or North Korea. And in terms of population, it has a population of between 3.5 and 4 million people. So that would be a population, I think, bigger than Uruguay, for instance. So it's quite an important and quite a large territory and quite a large population. And what's absolutely fascinating is that Somalilanders have built peace, and they've maintained peace for more than 20 years by relying on insiders, by using grassroots bottom-up associations of the kind that I was telling you about. And now I'm gonna try to stop sharing my screen. Okay, and so to me, Somaliland is really an example to show that that we can really scale up this kind of approach, and we can have it work over a very large territory and a quasi-state.
I think the interesting thing too about that case is the international community wasn't in the driver's seat. Right? So it actually is a really incredible success case of when the international community wasn't, I mean, they were invested. I don't want to trivialize that, but they most certainly were not driving the process.
Which goes back to Tom's question, is like, it's really like, it's scaling up the method with the international community being present. The United Nations was involved, donors were involved, but they had to remain low profile. They had to remain in the backseat. They had to basically let local actors, local citizens, ordinary people, clan leaders decide how they wanted to do the process. And to go back to your point, Megan, about patience, the process took a lot of time. They had also, international actors had to work at the pace of the local communities, which was incredibly important in promoting success in Somaliland.
Right. And I think often the international community gets impatient because of budget cycles, because of horizons with projects. Like we have to show outcomes in 1 year time. And as we know, peace and development, these are long generational processes that you can't kind of capture in a 6-month horizon. I mean, sometimes, but very, very, very rarely. We have another question from Tom in the chat. He says, now we live in the age of misinformation, which seems like a genuine threat to a local approach. Are there solutions assuming that local ground up solutions can also be misguided?
Yes, of course. I have two ways to answer your question, Tom. The first one is that in all of the cases that all of the stories I tell in the book, they all take place in conflict that are extremely divided, where misinformation is absolutely rampant. The Congo, if any of you has ever been there, it's the country where rumor is absolutely king. And South Sudan and Sudan, where Megan has spent a lot of her career, I remember rumors being also like unfounded, like sometimes really, really bizarre rumor, being also very, very influential. And so the fact that disinformation exists, it's something that we see in conflict zone all the time. So the entire approach that I'm suggesting take this disinformation into account. And so one of the ways to deal with it is to really involve everybody in the analysis of the problem, because when people who are on opposite side get to confront their point of view and their view of the situations, that's where they manage to have a better understanding, and that's where they manage to make the difference between rumors and actual facts. And the other thing, to finish answering your question, Tom, is that there is absolutely no assumption that local people or local solutions are going to be peaceful, that they're going to be, the ideal way to resolve the situation. Quite the opposite. A lot of time in the book, I explain how a lot of conflicts are driven by local antagonisms, by local disputes, by local actors, by clan leaders, by ordinary citizens on the ground. And so the idea is that local people are not necessarily better than their leaders to resolve conflict, but I think that they are better placed to resolve conflict that take place in their villages, because they know the ins and outs of the conflicts in their villages. While it's the same thing here. As a New Yorker from the Upper West Side, I would be completely unable to go and resolve conflict in Atlanta or in Boulder, in Colorado. Just like like even from someone from the Upper West Side, I would be out of my depths if I were trying to change the situation in the Bronx. So it's really the members of the community who have the knowledge, who have the network, who can really help build peace. And for that, as I show in the book, and as we've been discussing with Megan, outside help is really helpful and it's really important, but it has to be a different kind of outside help compared to the one that we're currently giving.
Thank you. I'm going to move to one more question that I had thought about when reading the book. I was reflecting on the vital role of women in peace and security at the grassroots level, and often their glaring absence at the high level. We just have to look at the current delegations to the Afghan peace talks, which there's one woman in the entire group, and actually on one side, and on the other side there's no women. What are some practical ideas or ways to begin to address this imbalance?
So there are several ways. The first one is that once we start relying more on ordinary citizens, on civil society members, that's going to help increase the gender diversity of the negotiating teams. Because unfortunately, as we know, so for most political teams, or high-level political leaders, they tend to be male, and women are not represented very much in this kind of high-level political power circles. So once we start including ordinary citizens and grassroots leaders, mechanically we're going to have more women. The other thing is, if we actually want to be even more proactive and to make sure that more women are involved, we have to ask them. We can't. That's the whole thing that I also, as you remember, Megan, that I say in the book, is that template solutions don't work. We cannot have a template answer, a worldwide answer to everything. We can have some guiding ideas. We can have some guiding principles. We can have models and ideas to look at. But we can, something that's going to work for, let's say, Afghanistan is not necessarily going to work for South Sudan. So we need to work with the women of Afghanistan to ask them what are their specific barriers to entering the specific peace process, and what kind of support they need from us to remove these barriers. And we need to do the same thing for every single peace process where we want to see more women involved.
Yeah, I completely agree. Emmanuel, I see your hand up. Yep, thank you.
Oh yeah, sorry. Thank you very much, Séverine. This is really interesting, and as Megan says, really resonates with my experience as a public health worker internationally. I guess, and nobody needs cynics, but so apologies for bringing a cynical note. But what you said applies to so many areas of aid work, but none so much as pandemic, fighting epidemics and in the Ebola epidemic. So, in my experience like that of many people was that coming on the ground and discover that basically what's being done internationally is close to useless, and incredible work is highly effective work is being done in the complete dark by people locally who know what they're talking about, in part because they're from the community. However, so I'd hope, so I would have, if it had been, maybe 2014 or 2015, I would have hoped, yes, if we do things differently, it will be, and I found there was, that message resonated, and we had donors who were willing to support it and all that. But in practice, I look, now 6-7 years later, and plus ça change, like the people, because both the donors, but even within the UN system and within NGOs, that the same phenomenons you see in the corporate world of whoever speaks loudest and has most self-confidence is that gets more attention than the actual work done by people who might not even speak English. And so I guess maybe I would say, how do you change the kind of institutional, even the human resource practices, which make it that even though people might, even somebody, the head of the UN might read your book and say, I agree, but you won't find different hiring practices.
Yeah, thank you. That's something I've been wondering for years now. And so I think that if we want to actually change things on the ground, we need to work both from the top down and from the bottom up. Within the organization. So organizations can change, and they can change if there is an external shock, so something major that happens, an act of God, like we can't create it, or they can change if they have the top leadership, as you see, for example, the head of the UN or the head of the State Department saying, we absolutely need to do X, Y, Z, putting resources, putting policies, putting regulations, but also we need to have a grassroots, a bottom-up a bottom-up movement on that, and we need to have people within the organization who think it's a good idea and who try to make it a reality, because otherwise, as you're saying, Emmanuel, we're going to have what we currently have in the peace industry right now, which is a lot of lip service paid to the ideas. Oh yes, it's important to put local actors in the driver's seat. Oh yes, it's important to work on local conflict resolutions, but in practice, nothing has changed. Plus ça change, plus c'est pareil. So that's and that's why I've written this book. It's because my previous book was focused on everything that was wrong with the peace industry. It was a very critical book, and I got a lot of people who came to me afterwards, and they were like, "Okay, I completely agree. So what? Like, where do we go from there? What do we do? Do you have any kind of model? Do you have anything we can do?" And after getting this question at conferences, seminars, this kind of presentations, like, over and over again, I thought, well, yeah, they really have a point, because if I want to have not only the top down, the critic is really good for getting people from the top to actually act on something and do something. But if we want to have the bottom up thing, I really need to give them more than just criticisms. And so that's why I've written the book, and the book is full of role models. It's full of ideas. It's full of stories, and it's telling people not, go and replicate that exactly, but it's more, hey, this is what has worked in this situation, this is what has worked in that situation. These are all ideas that you can use when you're trying to do your own work, and when you are trying to change things from the inside. And so I'm hoping that that people who are convinced by these ideas, and apparently there are a lot of people within the United Nations, within organizations, I'm hoping that they can use the book as a way to advocate for their ideas, and as a way also to show, okay, it's possible to do things differently, and it's possible not to listen to the loudest voice. It's possible not to go back to the same old patterns, and so I really hope that the book is going to help them make the changes that we all want to see.
Thank you very much. I have the book, and so I'll read it with the same hope that you put into it.
Thanks for that. We have a question now from Fanny. She asks, development economists in recent years have been working a lot at the local level with local populations. Even though their goal is more focused on fighting poverty rather than bringing peace, do you have any interaction with them?
Yes, thank you, Fanny. I've looked a lot at the debate on community-driven development, and all of the debates, and I have a very technical answer to your question about what are the relationships and the difference between CDD, CDR, and my approach, which I think would bore a lot of people on this call, maybe even you, because it's really technical. So just to try to summarize it very briefly in a minute. So development economists, when they work at the local level, they still use it's still very much saying things, but not completely, like talking the talk, but not completely walking the walk. Meaning that community-driven development are supposed to put local communities in charge and ordinary people in charge, but still, when you actually look at how they're implemented, donors still continue to run the show. Meaning that, for example, donors are going to arrive and they're going to say, well, okay, you decide what you want to do, but actually, let me tell you what the constraints are. The constraints are that you need to work within, you need to have a project that is about these categories, that involve this kind of people, that takes place in this area, that has this kind of characteristics, and that takes 6 months, and that doesn't cost more than, so, there are all of these constraints. And so it's a little bit as if, you're hungry and someone tells you, well, you can have Burger King or McDonald's. And you're like, well, I wanted to have spinach with I mean, you know what I mean. You have so little choice and so little freedom as members of the community in community development, community-driven development, that it really remains very much like the peace building programs that we see, where there is this discourse that local people are important and that they're in charge, but in practice, they're not. I could go on and on.
We have another question in the chat box from, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Dalan, I believe is how it's pronounced, Dalan, who asks, what are the pros and cons of bottom-up approach to peace building? That is, a people-led approach in the Turkish-Kurdish context, or cases similar to that one. I conducted fieldwork in Kurdish borderlands when the ceasefire was in place, 2013-14. Do you think that creating local conflict-free zones would work in those contexts? What else do we need for success in such peace processes? Thanks for the question.
So the short answer is I don't know, because I haven't studied the Kurdish-Turkish context. So from what I know, there are people who are working on that and who see the value of this approach. I haven't studied it. I think that we have someone in this call, in this meeting, who is from the region and who would actually be much better placed than I. Ahusha, I see you nodding. Can I suggest that he takes the floor and answer the question?
Oh, would you feel comfortable doing that? Go ahead then. Can you unmute yourself?
Hello, everyone.
There you
I'm
are.
so happy to be here. So I just wanted to make another comment, but since I'm a Kurdish person here, maybe just Séverine told me to make a comment. You know, in my opinion, Séverine is completely right, you know, because I think that if someone come from out to the community, he or she couldn't make a good rule in making peace. But, you know, Kurdish and Turkish challenges in the Middle East has a really long history, and I think it needs more effort, not just politically. It's likely to be trying in cultural way, you know. So it's the way I'm watching the peace making and peace building, you know. Actually, I have a criticism about the political science researchers, you know. It's like doctors who try to treat someone who has some malady or issues, you know. But I think it's much, it should be much better that we try to making positive peace rather than negative peace, you know. For example, we shouldn't try to have some challenge or problem that someone, if out or in the community, try to make peace, you know. We should try to make peace in the future with the future generation. So I think it's the difference between the two views of peace building. The first is to making peace between community who has problems. The other way is to preventing challenge and war or other challenges. So I think everyone has to try in its own way. So, for example, I study in educational science, and I try to people or to make peace in my community for students, no, not just to make peace between the countries or community who has problems together, or in international level, or if they have wars. So I think everyone has find out our own way to make a peace.
Thanks for those reflections. I appreciate you sharing with all of us. Thank you. Séverine, did you did you want to comment further, or should we move on to the next question?
I mean, seriously, I'm trying to how do you say, walk the walk. I mean, do what I preach. So and Dylan, I saw in the chat, was saying I am a Kurdish woman. So I think that you know, I would much rather listen to them and follow their leads on what they think would work in their own community, rather than me, who's never been to this part, I mean, to this specific part of Turkey, and who lives in New York. So
I wholeheartedly agree. I also wouldn't want to comment on a context that I don't have any real background in. Dylan, did you want to add anything? Not to put you on the spot, but also wanted to.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Séverine and Autesserre. Yeah, I mean, this is my research topic that I wrote my dissertation on. I worked on territorial control, but I didn't specifically focus on peace building process itself. I look at the limits of democratic opening in Turkey, and my main argument is slightly different than several others. Like, I argued that territorial control at the local level is the main reason that explains the failure of peace process in Turkey, which came to an end in the summer of 2015. By the way, I'm political. I'm a Kurdish woman coming from political background, so I'm quite familiar not only with Turkish Kurdistan, but also Iraqi Kurdistan. I traveled there, so on and so forth. So I'm quite familiar with several dynamics, not only in party politics at the elitist level, but also things happening on the ground. So this is just a minor remark to some comments as an answer to some comments of Autesserre. So I would like to thank you for this amazing research, because it's a very, I think, very good example of a comparative work, especially for those scholars interested in comparative research. So I will definitely read the book. Thank you very much again.
thank you, Dylan.
Thanks for that. We have a few more questions in the chat box. I'm also mindful of the time. This one is fundamentally, why are outsiders needed to empower insiders?
So they're not needed to empower insiders, but they're needed for a couple of things. So I'll tell you a story, because I love telling stories, and usually people enjoy stories. So you remember I was telling you that my previous book, it was called Peaceland, and it was extremely critical of international aid. And the first draft of that book was saying we just need to get completely rid of international interventions. We need to get rid of all of these outsiders who go to conflict zones, and really need to rely only on local people. And I went to a big conference to present this book, and there were, of course, a lot of international aid workers, and also a lot of grassroots activists coming from all over Africa. And so, as expected, the international aid workers were really angry with me. It was not the first time, it was fine, I was expecting it, I was used to it, that was fine. The grassroots activists were thrilled because they were like, yay, finally there is an outsider who's coming from the United States and who's saying that we have relevant skills and expertise. So that was expected as well. But then I also received a lot of pushback from the grassroots activists. And I distinctly remember there was this Somali woman who raised her hand and who said, like, she was very sweet and very, very polite. And she very kindly told me that I was very wrong, and that I got it all wrong. And she said, you know what? I mean, what you're saying about all of the problems of international interveners and international aid workers, that's all true, but we do not want to get rid of international aid workers. We need them on the ground. And then she proceeded to tell me, so I need them. I actually enjoy interacting with people who come from other parts of the world, because when they have worked in other conflict situations, they can give me ideas for my own situation. Not that I want to like take the solution and apply them directly, but it's going to give me ideas of other problems that other people have faced and the kind of solutions that they've seen. And so I was like, oh, that's really interesting. So I started asking a lot more grassroots activists what they think was the contribution of international aid workers, and why we actually, like, did they agree that we still need outside involvement, and if so, to do what? And that's, you know, that ended up with the revised version of my previous book, and in this book. And in this book, I show that there are various things that outsiders bring to conflict zones and that are really important. Funding is extremely important. You know, monetary resources, protection from especially important when there is a militarized conflict or when there is a lot of violence ongoing, the kind of protection that enable the kind of dialogue that we want to see. Ideas from elsewhere. Connection also with the higher up, with the national and international authorities, because as we know, conflicts, even local conflicts, often have a national and international dimension. And so international outsiders are better placed to talk with national elites, because local actors, sometimes they have all of the ideas, they have the narrative, but they can't be listened to by their leaders. So outsiders help make the connection. And given that I'm mindful of the time, I'm going to stop. But it's in the book, and so the short answer is that there are things that outsiders do bring to conflict zones that are really important, and that's why they're still needed. It's not to empower, but it's actually to support local actors and local activists and ordinary people.
Thanks, Séverine. I'm going to just ask the final question, and I apologize to Lisa and Alex for their good questions in the chat box. This hour has flown as I anticipated it would. Your book, The Frontlines of Peace, is full of practical lessons, not just for conflict zones, but also in addressing and resolving tensions in our own cities and communities and in our own country. I appreciate your inclusion of the final chapter, The Home Front. We have international peace builders and aspiring peace builders among us today. What do you want to leave us with? What should we take away from our session and your book? Thanks again.
Okay, so according to my clock, we have 1 minute to wrap up. So I'm going to give a 30-second answer. What I want people to get from the book is hope. Really, it's hope, because it's a book about hope. It's a book about how each and every one of us can actually change the world. It's a book about how we can make a huge difference. If we're aspiring peace builders and we want to work in other community, we can really make a difference in other community, but also we can make a huge difference in our own community, wherever we live in the world. And so that's what I want people to get from the book, is hope and a desire to get involved and to change things for the better.
Awesome. We all have a role to play. Thank you everyone for coming today, and again to the French America Foundation. Séverine, thank you for your career and your passion, your newest book. I highly recommend it. And everyone for your insights. And again, sorry for those who we did not get to in the chat box, this hour flew. So thank you, Katie, over to you.
Sure, yeah, thank you so much to both of you, to Séverine. I'm definitely going to pick up a copy of this book, and to Megan also for your thoughtful moderation. Just before I log off, I wanted to note that the Foundation's next public webinar will be held on April 21st at 1 p.m. to examine the current state of the transatlantic relationship and the US-Europe alliance. It'll be featuring guest speaker Scott Coulinane, who's the executive director of the US-Europe Alliance, and moderated by Chris Lubeau, who is a manager of international operations and business continuity at the Ford Foundation, a former diplomat, and a 2020 French American Foundation Young Leader. So thanks so much again, everyone. I really appreciate this discussion. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.